quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight.
Helps if I unmute. Wow, the ads went by a lot faster tonight. Normally I can get through most of that song. Anyway, welcome in Guilty. I'm pretty sure First is still available, because you're like the only one here. But yeah, I'm using this model tonight, and probably I'll use it next Friday until I can finish up the Crimson Fairy book. And then, when I switch books, then I'll switch models for fairy tales. I was able to do it yesterday because I'd started a new book. And I'm weird, I like consistency. So, new book, I'll go ahead and do the new model. Gaming, I'll use a new model. The Mummy, I'll use a new model, but I'm going to go ahead and use this one until I'm at least finished with the Crimson Fairy book. So, how has your week been? And no cats on the bed. Again. I think I need to adjust the camera down a little. Quiet and easy. That tends to be good. I'm hoping that I don't have any technical issues tonight, because I don't know why I was having issues yesterday. My CPU was at max, my RAM was at 3/4, and Twitch was telling me that I had an unusual connection. So far, everything looks fine. So, Looks like I've got 9 fairy tales left in this book. So, should be able to finish it next week. And I had a weird feeling that someone might interrupt the stream tonight. And by interrupt the stream, I mean come to my front door. I don't know why, but I've got my front door camera on, so I'm kind of watching it. It's just one of those weird, unnerving feelings. An impidimp. I need to check my audio channels real quick, make sure I didn't. Okay. Alerts are still in audio too, so they're going to show up in the VOD. But I guess we can go ahead and go over to the library. Yeah, why is it so in fades? I told it to do a transition. Setup swipes. Close enough. That's way too fast. Let's do it for a second. Much better. And I caught the limpidimp. It's been a tiring day. I don't know why. Just saw one of the cats walk across the porch. As I said, I think I've got 9 stories left in this book. Let's see, I'm at Shepherd Paul. So let's see, there's Shepherd Paul, How the Wicked Tanuki Was Punished, The Crab and the Monkey, The Horse Gullfaxi and the Sword Gunnfoder, The Story of the Sham Prince, or The Ambitious Tailor, The Colony of Cats, How to Find Out a True Friend, Clever Maria, and The Magic Kettle. So yeah, 9 stories. Oof. Yay, fairy tales! Hey, Matsu. See, Guilty hasn't been shouted out yet. Shout out Matsu. And I see a certain duck. And Bill. No, Alan. I'll shout them out too. Maybe lurking, but I'm shouting you out anyway. And it looks like Kel is doing poetry. That makes sense. So, how has everyone else's evening been? Ooh. Yeah, it's usually not a good thing when the power goes out. Is it just storm or heat? Because heat will knock the power out down here. Ah. Aha. I can do that too. Oh yes, I have 9 stories left in the Crimson Fairy book. It's still a bit unstable. Hmm. Well, you have the book, so I don't have to worry about you really missing any stories other than just me narrating. Hearing that background noise. I don't know where the sounds are going. Yeah, as I said, I'm like 9 stories from the end of it. And then when I finish this one, I'll move on to the next one, but then I'll go ahead and change to my new model. At least for Fridays. I already changed it yesterday for when I was reading The Mummy. And those who haven't seen it yet, this is a new model. I have to adjust more to fit my sets. Okay. This is more where I'd be sitting for this one. But anyway, I'm sticking to the old model until I finish this book. It is a really good model. Fan artsy, and Ryan did a really good job on it. No, so it's just for my recording continuity. I'm sticking to this one until I finish the book. Let's see, it's already 9:13, so I should probably get into the book. And this one is from the Ungarisch Martian. I'm drinking out of Wild Bill's mug. But our first story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales, Shepherd Paul. Once upon a shepherd was taking his flock out to pasture when he found a little baby lying in a meadow, left there by some wicked person who thought it was too much trouble to look after it. The shepherd was fond of children, so he took the baby home with him and gave it plenty of milk, and by the time the boy was 14, he could tear up oaks as if they were weeds. Then Paul, as the shepherd had called him, grew tired of living at home and went out into the world to try his luck. He walked for many miles, seeing nothing that surprised him, but in an open space of the wood he was astonished at finding a man combing trees as another man would comb flax. "Good morning, friend," said Paul. "Upon my word, you must be a strong man." The man stopped his work and left. "I am the tree comber," he answered proudly, "and the greatest wish of my life is to wrestle with Shepherd Paul." "May all your wishes be fulfilled easily, for I am Shepherd Paul, and can wrestle with you at once," replied the lad. And he seized the tree comber and flung him with such force to the ground that he sank up to his knees in the earth. However, in a moment he was up again, and catching hold of Paul, threw him so that he sank up to his waist. But then again, it was Paul's turn, and this time the man was buried up to his neck. "Enough is enough," he cried. "I see you are a smart fellow. Let us become friends." "Very good," answered Paul, and they continued their journey together. By and by they reached a man who was grinding stones into powder in his hands, as if they were just nuts. "Good morning," said Paul politely. "Upon my word, you must be a strong fellow." "I am Stone Crusher," answered the man, "and the greatest wish of my life is to wrestle with Shepherd Paul." "May all your wishes be as easily fulfilled, for I am Shepherd Paul, and will wrestle with you at once." And the sport began. After a short time, the man declared himself beaten, and begged leave to go with them. So they all three traveled together. A little further on, they came upon a man who was kneading iron as if it had been dough. "Good morning," said Paul. "You must be a strong fellow." "I am Iron Kneader, and should like to fight Shepherd Paul," answered he. "Well, let us begin at once, then," replied Paul, and on this occasion also Paul got the better of his foe, and they all four continued their journey. At midday they entered a forest, and Paul stopped suddenly. "We three will go and look for game," he said, "and you, Tree Comber, will you stay behind to prepare a good supper for us?" So Tree Comber set off to work and boil and roast, and when dinner was ready, a little dwarf with a pointed beard strolled up to the place. "What are you cooking?" he asked. "Give me some of it." "I'll give you some on your back if you like," answered Tree Comber rudely. The dwarf took no notice, but waited patiently till the dinner was cooked. Then suddenly throwing Tree Comber on the ground, he ate up all the contents of the saucepan and vanished. Tree Comber felt rather ashamed of himself and set about boiling some more vegetables, but they were still very hard when the hunters returned. Though they complained of his bad cooking, he did not tell them about the dwarf. The next day Stone Crusher was left behind, and after him Iron Eater, and each time the dwarf appeared, and they fared no better than Tree Comber had done. The fourth day Paul said to them, "My friends, there must be some reason why your cooking has always been so bad. Now you shall go and hunt, and I will stay behind." So they went off, amusing themselves by thinking of what was in store for Paul. He set to work at once, and had just got his vegetables simmering in the pot when the dwarf appeared as before, and asked to have some of the stew. "Oh, be off!" cried Paul, snatching up the saucepan as he spoke. The dwarf tried to get a hold of his collar, but Paul seized him by the beard and tied him to a big tree so that he could not stir, and went on quietly cooking his food. The hunters came back early, longing to know what Paul had got to, and to their surprise, dinner was quite ready for them. "You are all useless creatures," he said. "You couldn't even outwit the little dwarf. When we have finished supper, I will show you what I've done with him." But when they reached the place where Paul had left the dwarf, neither he nor the tree was to be seen, for the little fellow had pulled it off from its roots and run away, dragging it after him. Four friends followed the track of the tree and found that it ended in a deep hole. "Well, he must have gone down there," said Paul, "and I will go after him. See, there's a basket that will do for me to sit in, and a cord to lower me with. But when I pull the cord again, lose no time in drawing up the basket." And he stepped into the basket, which was lowered by his friends. At last it touched the ground, and he jumped out and looked around him. He was in a beautiful valley full of meadows and streams, with a splendid castle standing by. As the door was open, he walked in, but a lovely maiden met him and implored him to go back, for the owner of the castle was a dragon with 6 heads, who had stolen her from her home and brought her down to this underground spot. But Paul refused to listen to all her entreaties and declared that he was not afraid of the dragon, and he did not care how many heads it had, and he sat down calmly to wait for it. In a little while the dragon came in, and all the long teeth in his 6 heads chattered with anger at the sight of the stranger. "I am Shepherd Paul," said the young man, "and I have come to fight you, and as I am in a hurry, we had better begin at once." "Very good," answered the dragon. "I'm sure my supper, but let us have a mouthful of something first, just to give us an appetite." Whereupon he began to eat some huge boulders, as if they had been cakes, and when he was quite finished, he offered Paul one. Paul, who was not fond of boulders, but took a wooden knife and cut one in two, and then snatched at both halves in his hands, and threw them in with all his strength at the dragon, so that 2 of the 6 heads were smashed in. At this the dragon, with a mighty roar, rushed upon Paul, but he sprang to one side, and with a swinging blow cut off 2 of the other heads. Then, seizing the monster by the neck, he dashed the remaining heads against the rock. When the maiden heard that the dragon was dead, she thanked her deliverer with tears in her eyes, but told him that her 2 younger sisters were in the power of dragons, still fiercer and more horrible than this one. He vowed that his sword should never rest in its sheath till they were set free, and bade the girl come with him and show him the way. The maiden gladly consented to go with him, but first she gave him a golden rod, and bade him strike the castle with it. He did so, and it instantly changed into a golden apple, which he put into his pocket. After that, they started on their search. They had not gone far before they reached a castle, and the second girl was confined by the power of the dragon with 12 heads, who had stolen her from her home. She was overjoyed at the sight of her sister and of Paul, and brought him a shirt belonging to the dragon, which made everyone who wore it twice as strong as they were before. Scarcely had he put it on when the dragon came back, and the fight began. Long and hard was the struggle, but Paul's sword and his shirt helped him, and the 12 heads lay dead upon the ground. Then Paul changed the castle into an apple, which he put into his pocket, and set out with the 2 girls in search of the 3rd castle. It was not long before they found it, and within the wall was the 3rd sister, who was younger and prettier than either of the other 2. Her husband had 18 heads, but when he quitted the little regions of the surface of the earth, he left them at home except one, which he had changed for the head of a little dwarf with a pointed beard. The moment that Paul knew that this terrible dragon was no other than the dwarf whom he had tied to the tree, he longed more than ever to fly at his throat. But the thought of 18 heads warned him to be careful, and the third sister brought him a silk shirt, which would make him 10 times stronger than he was before. He had scarcely put it on when the whole castle began to shake violently, and the dragon flew up the steps into the hall. Well, my friend, so we meet. Well, my friend, so we meet once more. Have you forgotten me? I am Shepherd Paul, and I have come to wrestle with you, and to free your wife from your clutches. I am glad to see you again, said the dragon. Those were my 2 brothers whom you killed. Now your blood shall pay for them. And he went into his room to look for a shirt and to drink some of his magic wine. But the shirt was on Paul's back, and as for the wine, the girl had given a cupful to Paul and then had allowed the rest to run out of the flask. At this the dragon grew rather frightened, but in a moment he had recollected his 18 heads, and was bold again. Come on, he cried, rearing himself up and preparing to dart all his heads at once at Paul. But Paul jumped underneath and gave an upward cut so that 6 heads went rolling down. They were the best heads, too, and very soon the other 12 lay beside them. Then Paul changed the castle into an apple and put it in his pocket. Afterwards he and the 3 girls set off for the opening which led upwards to the earth. The basket was still there, dangling from the rope, but it was only big enough to hold the 3 girls, so Paul sent them up, and told them to be sure to let down the basket for him. Unluckily, at the sight of the maiden's beauty, so far beyond anything they'd ever seen, the friends forgot all about Paul, and carried the girls straight away into their far country, so that they were not much better off than before. Meanwhile, Paul, mad with rage at the ingratitude of the 3 sisters, vowed he would be revenged upon them, and set about finding some way of getting back to Earth. But it was not very easy, and for months and months and months he wandered about underground, and at the end seemed no nearer than fulfilling his purpose than he was at the beginning. At length one day he happened to pass the nest of a huge griffin, who had left her little ones all alone. Just as Paul came along, a cloud containing fire instead of rain burst overhead, and all the little griffins would certainly have been killed had Paul not spread his cloak over them and saved them. When their father returned, the young ones told him what Paul had done, and he lost no time in flying after Paul and asking how he could reward him for his goodness. By carrying me up to the earth, answered Paul, and the griffin agreed, but first went to get some food to eat for the way, as it was a long journey. Now get on my back, he said to Paul, and when I turn my head to the right, cut off a slice of the bullock that hangs on the left, and put it in my mouth. And when I turn my head to the left, draw a cupful of wine from the cask that hangs on that side, and pour it down my throat. Like any good tour pilot. For 3 days and 3 nights, Paul and the griffin flew upwards, and on the 4th morning it touched the ground just outside the city, where Paul's friends had gone to live. Then Paul thanked him and bade him farewell, and he returned home again. At first, Paul was too tired to do anything but sleep, but as soon as he was rested he started off in search of the 3 faithless ones, who almost died from fright at the sight of him, for they had thought he would never come back to approach him for their wickedness. You know what to expect, Paul said to them quietly. You shall never see me again. Off with you. He next took the 3 apples out of his pocket and placed them in the prettiest places he could find, after which he tapped them with his golden rod, and they became castles again. He gave 2 of the castles to the eldest sisters, and kept the other for himself and the youngest, whom he married, and they are still living there. Okay. So that had at least 4 story categories in it. travel and finding strong friends, the abandoned child, the three princesses underground, the griffin helping get out from under the ground, and turning castles into apples. Okay, so that's 5. I really need to get those index books. I may make a whole thing out of that. If I get around to it. But anyway, I would drop a niche, Martian. Next one. How the wicked Tanuki was punished. The hunters had hunted the wood for so many years that no wild animal was any more to be found in it. You might walk from one end to the other without ever seeing a hare, a deer, a boar, or even hearing the cooing of doves in their nest, as if they were not dead but had flown elsewhere. Only 3 creatures remained alive, and they had hidden themselves in the thickest part of the forest, high up on the mountain. They were a gray-furred, long-tailed Tanuki, his wife the fox, who has one of his own family, and their little son. The fox and the Tanuki were very clever, prudent beasts, and they were also skilled in magic, and by this means had escaped the fate of their unfortunate friends. If they heard a twang of an arrow or saw the glitter of a spear ever so far off, they lay very still and were not to be tempted out from their hiding place, if their hunger was ever so great or the game ever so delicious. "We are not so foolish to risk ourselves," they said to each other proudly. But at length there came a day when, in spite of their prudence, they seemed likely to die of starvation, for no more food was to be had. Something had to be done, but they did not know what. Suddenly a bright idea struck the Tanuki. "I've got a plan," he cried joyfully to his wife. "I will pretend to be dead, and you must change yourself into a man and take me to the village for sale. It will be easy to find a buyer. Tanuki skins are always wanted. Then buy some food with the money and come home again. I will manage to escape somehow, so do not worry about me." The fox laughed with delight and rubbed her paws together with satisfaction. "Well, next time I will go," she said, "and you can sell me." And then she changed herself into a man, and picking up the stiff body of the Tanuki, set off towards the village. She found him rather heavy, but it would never have done to let him walk through the woods and risk his being seen by anybody. As the Tanuki had foretold, buyers were many, and the fox handed him over to the person who offered the largest prize, and hurried to get some food with the money. The buyer took the Tanuki back to his house, and throwing him into the corner, went back out. Directly the Tanuki had found he was alone, he crept cautiously through a chink in the window, thinking, as he did so, how lucky it was that he was not a fox, and was able to climb. Once outside, he hid himself in a ditch till it grew dusk, then galloped away into the forest. While the food lasted, they were all 3 happy as kings, but there soon arrived a day when the larder was as empty as ever. "It is my turn to pretend to be dead," cried the fox. So the Tanuki changed himself into a peasant and started for the village, with his wife's body hanging over his shoulder. The buyer was not long in coming forward, and while they were making the bargain, a wicked thought darted through the Tanuki's head, that if he got rid of the fox, there would be more food for him and his son. So as he put the money in his pocket, he whispered softly to the buyer that the fox was not really dead, and that if he did not take care, she might run away from him. The man did not need tolling twice. He gave the poor fox a blow on the head, which put an end to her, and the wicked Tanuki went smiling to the nearest shop. In former times he had been very fond of his little son, but since he had betrayed his wife, he seemed to have changed all in a moment, for he would not give him as much as a bite, and the poor little fellow would have starved had he not found some nuts and berries to eat, and he waited on, always hoping that his mother would come back. At length some notion of the truth began to dawn on him, but he was careful not to let the old Tanuki see anything, though in his own mind he turned over plans from morning till night, wondering how best he might avenge his mother. One morning, as the little Tanuki was sitting with his father, he remembered, with a start, that his mother had taught him all she knew of magic, and that he could work spells as well as his father, but perhaps even better. "I'm as good a wizard as you," he said suddenly, and a cold chill ran through the Tanuki as he heard him, though he laughed and pretended to think it was a joke. But then the little Tanuki struck to his point, and at last the father proposed that they should have a wager. "Change yourself into any shape you like," he said, "and I will undertake to know you. I will go and wait to the bridge which leads over the river to the village, and you shall transform yourself into anything you please, but I will know you through any disguise." The little Tanuki agreed and went down to the road which his father had pointed out. But instead of transforming himself into a different shape, he just hid himself in a corner of the bridge, where he could see without being seen. He had not been there long when his father arrived and took up his place near the middle of the bridge. And soon after, the king came by, followed by a troop of guards and all of his court. "Aha! He thinks that now he has changed himself into a king I shall not know him," thought the old Tanuki, and as the king passed in his splendid carriage, borne by his servants, he jumped upon it, crying, "I have won my wager! You cannot deceive me!" But in reality it was he who had deceived himself. The soldiers, convinced that their king was being attacked, seized the Tanuki by the legs and flung him into the river, and the water closed over him. And the little Tanuki saw it all, and rejoiced that his mother's death had been avenged. And then he went back to the forest, and if he has not found it too lonely, he's probably still living there. Tanukis. Now, I wouldn't have thought that they don't know how to swim. And they just threw him in the river. They didn't say they tied his feet. They just said they grabbed him by his feet. Now they just seized the Tanuki by the legs and flung him over the river. So unless it's just really shallow, the Tanuki should have survived. I would think. Because I'm fairly sure Tanuki can swim. If not, make something into a raft. Anyway. 23 minutes. Should be able to do this one. So next story, also from the Japanese Mashin. The Crab and the Monkey. There was once a crab who lived in a hole on the shady side of the mountain. She was a very good housewife, and so careful and industrious that there was no creature in the whole country whose hole was so neat and clean as hers, and she took great pride in it. One day she saw lying near the mouth of her hole a handful of cooked rice, which some pilgrim must have let fall when he was stopping to eat his dinner. Delighted in this discovery, she hastened to the spot and was carrying the rice back into her hole when a monkey, who lived some trees nearby, came down to see what the crab was doing. His eyes shone at the sight of the rice, for it was his favorite food, and like the sly fellow he was, he proposed a bargain to the crab. She was to give him half the rice in exchange for a kernel of sweet red kaki fruit which he had just eaten. He half expected the crab would laugh in his face for this impudent proposal, but instead of doing so, she only looked at him for a moment, with her head to one side, and then said she would agree to the exchange. So the monkey went off with his rice, and the crab returned to her hole with the kernel. For some time the crab saw no more of the monkey, who had gone to pay a visit to the sunny side of the mountain. But one morning he happened to pass by her hole, and found her sitting under the shadow of a beautiful khaki tree. "Good day," he said politely. "You have some fine fruit there. I'm very hungry. Could you spare one or two?" "Oh, certainly," replied the crab. "But you must forgive me if I cannot get them for you myself. I am no tree climber." "Pray do not apologize," answered the monkey. "Now that I have your permission, I can get them easily for myself." And the crab consented to let him go up, merely saying that he must throw down half of the fruit. In another moment he was swinging himself from branch to branch, eating all of the ripest khakis and filling his pockets with the rest. And the poor crab saw to her disgust that the few he threw down to her were either not ripe, or else quite rotten. "You're a shocking rogue!" she called in a rage, but the monkey took no notice, and went on eating as fast as he could. The crab understood that it was no use of her scolding, so she revolved that the cunning would do. "Sir Monkey," she said, "you're certainly a very good climber, but now that you have eaten too much, I'm quite sure you would never be able to run one of your somersaults." The monkey prided himself on turning better somersaults than any of his family, so he instantly went head over heels 3 times on the bough on which he was sitting, and all the beautiful khakis that he had hidden in his pockets rolled to the ground. Quick as lightning, the crab picked them up and carried the quantity of them into her house. But when she came up for another, the monkey sprang on her and treated her so badly that he left her for dead. When he had beaten her till his arms ached, he went away. It was a lucky thing for the poor crab that she had some friends to come to help her, for certainly she would have died then and there. The wasp flew to her and took her back to bed and looked after her, and then he consulted with a rice mortar and an egg which had fallen out of the nest nearby, and they agreed that when the monkey returned, as he was sure to do, to steal the rest of the fruit, that they would punish him severely for the manner in which he had behaved to the crab. So the mortar climbed up to a beam over the front door, and the egg lay quite still on the ground, while the wasp set down a water bucket in the corner. Then the crab dug itself a deep hole in the ground, so that not even the tip of her claws might be seen. Soon after everything was ready, the monkey jumped down from his tree, and creeping to the door again, a long hypocritical speech asking pardon for all that he had done. He waited for an answer of some sort, but none came. He listened, but all was still. Then he peeped and saw no one, and he went in. He peered about for the crab, but in vain, but his eyes fell on the egg, which he snatched up and set on the fire. But in the moment the egg had burst into 1,000 pieces, and its sharp shell struck him in the face and scratched him horribly. Smarting with pain, he ran to the bucket and stooped down to throw some water over his head. As he stretched out his hand, up started the wasp and stung him on the nose. The monkey shrieked and ran to the door, but as he passed through, down fell the mortar and struck him on the head, dead. After that, the crab lived happily for many years, and at length died in peace under her own khaki tree. Okay. Monkeys, don't be mean. Okay, let me check to see how long this one is. It's like 17 minutes. 8 pages. I can pause that if I need to. From Icelandish Martian. The horse Gullfaxi and the sword Gunnfoder. Many, many years ago there lived a king and queen who had one only son, called Sigurd. When the little boy was only 10 years old, the queen, his mother, fell ill and died, and the king, who loved her dearly, built a splendid monument to his wife's memory. And day after day he sat by it and bewailed his sad loss. One morning, as he sat by the grave, he noticed a richly dressed lady close to him. He asked her name, and she answered that it was Ingeborg, and seemed surprised to see the king there, all alone. Then he told her how he had lost his queen, and how he had come daily to weep for her in her grave. In return, the lady informed him that she had lately lost her husband, and suggested that they might both find comfort if they made friends. This pleased the king so much that he invited her to the palace, where they saw each other often, and after a time he married her. After the wedding was over, he soon regained his good spirits, and used to ride out hunting in the old days. But Sigurd, who was very fond of his stepmother, always stayed home with her. One evening Ingeborg said to Sigurd, "Tomorrow your father is going out hunting, and you must go with him." But Sigurd said he would much rather stay at home, and the next day when the king rode off, Sigurd refused to accompany him. The stepmother was very angry, but he would not listen, and at last she assured him that he would be very sorry for his disobedience, and in the future he had better do what he was told. After the hunting party had started, she hid Sigurd under her bed and bade him be sure to lie there until she called for him. Sigurd lay very still for a long while, and was just thinking it was no good staying there any more, when he felt the floor shake under him, as if there was an earthquake, and peeping out he saw a great giantess wading along ankle-deep through the ground and plowing it up as she walked. "Good morning, Sister Ingeborg," cried she as she entered the room. "Is Prince Sigurd at home?" "No," said Ingeborg. "He rode off in the forest with his father this morning." And she laid the table for her sister, and set food before her. After they had both done eating, the giantess said, "Thank you, sister, for your dinner. The best lamb, the best beer, and the best drink I've ever had. But is not Prince Sigurd at home?" Ingeborg again said no, and the giantess took leave of her, and she went away. When she was quite out of sight, Ingeborg told Sigurd to come out of the hiding place. The king returned home at night, but his wife told him nothing of what had happened, and the next morning she again begged the prince to go out hunting with his father. Sigurd, however, replied as before, that he would much rather stay at home. So once more the king rode off alone. This time Ingeborg heard Sigurd under the table, and scolded him well for not doing what she bade him. For some time he lay quite still, when suddenly the floor began to shake, and the giantess came along, wading halfway to her knees through the ground. As she entered the house, as she had done first, "Well, Sister Ingeborg, is Prince Sigurd at home?" "No," answered Ingeborg. "He rode off hunting with his father this morning." And going to the cupboard, she laid the table for her sister. When they had finished their meal, the giantess rose again and said, "Thank you for all the nice dishes, for the best lamb, for the best beer, and the nicest drink I've ever had. But is Prince Sigurd really not at home?" "No, certainly not," replied Ingeborg, and with that they took their leave of each other. When she was well out of sight, Sigurd crept from under the table, and the stepmother declared that it was most important that he should not stay at home the next day. But he said he did not see what harm could come of it, and he did not mean to go on hunting. And the next morning, when the king prepared to start, Ingeborg implored Sigurd to accompany his father. But it was no use at all. He was quite obstinate and would not listen to a word she said. "You will have to hide me again," he said. So no sooner had the king gone than Ingeborg hid Sigurd between the wall and the paneling, and by there was heard once more the sound like an earthquake, as a great giantess, wading knee-deep through the ground, came to the door. "Good day, Sister Ingeborg," she cried, in a voice like thunder. "Is Prince Sigurd at home?" "Oh, no," answered Ingeborg. "He is enjoying himself out there with the forest. I expect it'll be quite dark before he comes back again. That's a lie! Shouted the giantess, and they squabbled about it till they were tired, after which Ingeborg laid the table, and when the giantess had been done eating, she said, Well, I must thank you for these good things, for the best lamb, for the best beer, and the best drink I've had in a long time, but are you quite sure Prince Sigurd is not at home? Quite, said Ingeborg. I've already told you that he rode off with his father this morning to hunt in the forest. At this the giantess roared out in a terrible voice, If he is near enough to hear my words, I lay this spell on him. Let him be half scorched and half withered, and may he neither rest nor peace till he finds me. And with these words, she stalked off. For a moment Ingeborg stood as if turned to stone. Then she fed Sigurd from his hiding place, and to her horror there he was, half scorched and half withered. Now you see what has happened through your own obstinacy, she said. But we must lose no time. Your father will be coming home. Going quickly into the next room, she opened a chest and took out a ball of string and 3 gold rings, and gave them all to Sigurd, saying, If you throw this ball on the ground, it will roll along until it reaches some high cliffs. There you will see the giantess looking out over the rocks. She will call down to you and say, this is just what I wanted. Here is Prince Sigurd. He shall go into the pot tonight. But don't be frightened by her. She will draw you up with a long boat hook, and you must greet her from me, and give her the smallest ring as a present. This will please her, and she will ask you to wrestle with her. When you are exhausted, she will offer you a horn to drink out of. And though she does not know it, the wine will make you so strong that you will easily be able to conquer her. After that, she will let you stay there all night. The same thing will happen with my other 2 sisters. Above all, remember this. Should my little dog come to you and lay his paws on you, with tears running down his face, then hurry home. My life is in danger. Now, goodbye, and don't forget your stepmother. Then Ingeborg dropped the ball on the ground and bade Sigurd farewell. That same evening the ball stopped rolling at the foot of some high rocks, and on glancing up, Sigurd saw the giantess looking out at the top. Just what I wanted, she cried out when she saw him. Here is Prince Sigurd. He shall go into the pot tonight. Come up, my friend, and wrestle with me. With these words, she reached out her long boat hook and hauled him up the cliff. At first Sigurd was rather frightened, but he remembered what Ingeborg had said, and gave the giantess her sister's message, and the ring. The giantess was delighted and challenged him to wrestle with her. Sigurd was fond of all games, and began to wrestle with joy, but he was no match for the giantess, and she noticed that he was getting faint, and she gave him a horn to drink of, which was very foolish on her part, as it made Sigurd so strong that he soon overthrew her. You may stay here tonight, she said, and he was glad of the rest. The next morning Sigurd threw down the ball again, and it rolled away for some time until it stopped at the foot of another high rock. Then he looked up and saw another giantess, even bigger and uglier than the first one, who called out to him, This is just what I wanted. Here is Prince Sigurd. You shall go into the pot tonight. Come up quickly and wrestle with me. And she lost no time hauling him up. The prince gave her his stepmother's message and the second largest ring. The giantess was greatly pleased when she saw the ring, and at once challenged Sigurd to wrestle with her. They struggled for a long time, till at last Sigurd grew faint, so she handed him a horn to drink from, and when he had drunk he became so strong that he threw her down with one hand. On the third morning, Sigurd once more laid down his ball, and rolled far away, until it stopped under a very high rock indeed, over the top of which the most hideous giantess that ever was seen looked down. When she saw who was there, she cried out, it is this what I wanted. Here comes Prince Sigurd. Into the pot he goes this very night. Come up here, my friend, and wrestle with me. and she hauled him up just as her sisters had done. Sigurd then gave his stepmother's message and the last and larger ring. The sight of the red gold delighted the giantess, and she challenged Sigurd to a wrestling match. This time the fight was fierce and long, and at length, when Sigurd's strength was failing, the giantess gave him something to drink, and after he had drunk it, he soon brought her to her knees. "You have beaten me," she gasps. "So now listen to me. Not far from here is a lake. Go there, and you'll find a little girl playing with a boat. Try and make friends with her, and give her this little gold ring. You are stronger than ever you were, and I wish you good luck." With these words, they took leave of each other, and Sigurd wandered on till he reached the lake, where he found the little girl playing with her boat, just as he had been told. He went up to her and asked her what her name was. She was called Helga, she answered, and she lived nearby. Sigurd gave her the little gold ring and proposed that they should have a game. The little girl was delighted, for she had no brothers or sisters, and they played together all the rest of the day. When evening came, Sigurd asked leave to go home with her, but Helga first forbade him, as no stranger had ever managed to enter the house without being found by her father, who was a very fierce giant. However, Sigurd persisted, and at length she gave way. But when they came near the door, she held her glove over him, and Sigurd was at once transformed into a bundle of wool. Helga tucked the bundle under her arm and threw it on the bed in her room. Almost at the same moment, her father rushed in and hunted around every corner, crying out, "This place smells of men. What's that you threw on your bed, Helga?" A bundle of wool." "Oh, well, perhaps it was that I smelt," said the old man, and troubled himself no more. The following day, Helga went out to play and took a bundle of wool with her under her arm. When she reached the lake, she held her glove over it again, and Sigurd resumed his own shape. They played the whole day, and Sigurd taught Helga all sorts of games that she had never even heard of. As they walked home in the evening, she said, "We shall be able to play better still tomorrow, for my father will have to go to town, and we can stay at home." And when they were near the house, Helga again threw a glove over Sigurd, and once more he turned into a bundle of wool, and she carried him in without his being seen. Very early next morning, Helga's father went to town, and as soon as he was well out of the way, the girl held out her glove and Sigurd was himself again. Then she took him all over the house to amuse him, and opened every room, for her father had given her the keys before he left. But when they came to the last room, Sigurd noticed one key on the bunch, which had not been used, and asked which room it belonged to. Helga grew red and did not answer. "I suppose you don't mind me seeing which room it opens?" asked Sigurd. And he spoke. He saw a heavy iron door and begged Helga to unlock it for him. But she told him she dared not do so. At least, if she did open the door, it must only be a very tiny chink, and Sigurd declared that would do quite well. The door was so heavy that it took Helga some time to open it, and Sigurd grew so impatient that he pushed it wide open and walked in. There he saw a splendid horse, already saddled. Just above it hung a richly ornamented sword, on the handle of which was engraved these words, "He who rides this horse and wears this sword will find happiness." At the sight of the horse, Sigurd was so filled with wonder that he was not able to speak, and as he gasped out, "Oh, do let me mount him and ride him around the house. Just once, I promise not to ask any more." "Ride him around the house!" cried Helga, growing pale at the mere ride. "Ride Gullfaxi! My father would never, never forgive me if I let you do that." "But what harm can it do?" argued Sigurd. "You don't know how careful I will be. I've ridden all sorts of horses at home, and I've never fallen off, not once. Oh, Helga, do." "Well, perhaps if you come back directly," replied Helga doubtfully. But you must be very quick, or father will find out. But instead of mounting Gullfaxi as she expected, Sigurd stood still. And the sword? He said, looking fondly up to the place where it hung. My father is a king, but he has got not any sword so beautiful as that, while the jewels in the scabbard are more splendid than the big ruby in his crown. He has got a name. Some swords have, you know. Hold on. My father is a king, and he's not got any sword so beautiful as that, while the jewels in the scabbard are more splendid than the big ruby in his crown. Has it got a name? Some swords have, you know. It is called Gunnfoder, the battle plume, cried Helga, and Gullfaxi means golden mane. I don't suppose if you are to get on the horse at all, it would matter if you take the sword too. And if you take the sword, you'll have to carry the stick and stone and twig as well. They're easily carried, said Sigurd, gazing at her with scorn. That wretched dried-up things. Why would you try to keep them? Father says he would rather lose Gullfaxi than those, replied Helga. For if a man who rides a horse is pursued, he has only to throw the twig behind him and it will turn into a forest so thick that even a bird could hardly fly through. But if there's any happens to know magic... But if the enemy happens to know any magic, he can throw it down the forest. And Helma has to strike the stone with a stick, and hailstones as large as pigeon eggs will rain down from the sky and kill everyone for 20 miles around. Having said all this, she allowed Sigurd to ride, just once, around the house, taking the sword and the other things with him. But when he had ridden around, instead of dismounting, suddenly turned the horse's head and galloped away. Soon after this, Helga's father came home and found his daughter in tears. He asked what was the matter, and when he heard all that had happened, he rushed off as fast as he could to pursue Sigurd. Now, as Sigurd happened to look behind him, and he saw the giant coming after him with great strides, and in all haste he threw the twig behind him. Immediately, such a thick wood sprang up at once between him and his enemy that the giant was obliged to run home for an axe with which to cut his way through. The next time Sigurd glanced around, the giant was so near that he almost touched Gullfaxi's tail. In an agony of fear, Sigurd quickly turned his saddle and hit the stone with a stick. No sooner had he done that than a terrible hailstorm burst behind him, and the giant was killed on the spot. But had Sigurd struck the stone without turning around, the hail would have driven right into the line and killed him instead. After the giant was dead, Sigurd rode towards his own home, and on the way he suddenly met his stepmother's little dog, running to meet him with tears pouring down his face. He galloped so hard as he could, and arriving, he found 9 men-servants in the act of trying Queen Ingeborg to a post in the courtyard of the palace, where they intended to burn her. Wild with anger, Prince Sigurd sprang from his horse, and sword in hand, killed all the men, and then released his stepmother and went in with her to see his father. The king lay in bed sick with sorrow, neither eating nor drinking, for he thought that his son had been killed by the queen. He could hardly believe his eyes with joy when he saw the prince, and Sigurd told him all his adventures. After that, Prince Sigurd rode back to fetch Helga, and had a great feast made which lasted 3 days, and everyone said no bride was ever so beautiful as Helga, and lived happily for many, many years, and everybody loved them. Yeah. So I had to pause the ads twice. So I guess we should better let this happen. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so the timer says that was 3 minutes. Did everyone actually get 3 minutes of ads? Because I've been noticing a lot lately that Twitch doesn't do 3 minutes. It'll be supposed to be a 3 minute ad break, and then it'll be like maybe a minute, might show one or two ads, period. But it won't be the full 3 minutes. And since I have to go by the timer, I don't know when you guys officially get back or not. So if it was less than 3 minutes for you, by all means, let me know. Or if you're lurking and you come back before the ads are done and the timer's in, I'll go ahead and come back and start again. If I'm sitting at my computer and not running around madly around the house. I just noticed I do not have the cat camera turned on this one. Which is fine because the cat is like 3 feet away from the bed. And looking at me funny because I'm talking about her. Anyway, there are now 5 stories left in the book. So, excuse me. Let's see if we can get through more. Our next story is another one of the ones that has different titles. The book has it listed by 2 different names. It is either The Story of the Sham Prince or The Ambitious Tailor. Once upon a time there lived a respectable young tailor named Labakan who worked for a clever master in Alexandria. No one could call Labakan either stupid or lazy, for he could work extremely well and quickly when he chose. But there was something not altogether right about him. Sometimes he would stitch away as fast as if he had a red-hot needle in a burning thread. And at other times he would sit lost in thoughts, with such a queer look about him that his fellow workmen used to say, "Labakan has got on his aristocratic face today." On Fridays, he would put on his fine robe, which he had bought with the money he had managed to save up, and go to the mosque. As he came back after prayers, if he met any friends who said, "Good day," or "How are you been, friend Labakan?" he would wave his hand graciously and nod in a condescending way, as if his master happened to say to him, as he sometimes did, "Really, Labakan, you look like a prince." He was delighted, and would answer, "Have you noticed it too?" Or, "Well, so I've long thought." Things like this went on for some time, and the master had put up with Labakan's absurdities because he was, on the whole, a good fellow and a clever workman. One day the Sultan's brother happened to be passing through Alexandria, and he wanted to have one of his state robes altered, so he sent for a master tailor, who handed the robe over to Labakan, as his best workman. In the evening, when everyone had left the workshop and had gone home, the great longing drove Labakan back to the place where the royal robe hung. He stood a long time gazing at it, admiring the rich material and the splendid embroidery on it. Alas, he could hold out no longer. He must try it on. And lo and behold, it fitted as though it had been made for him. "Am I not as good a prince as any other?" he said to himself. He proudly paced up and down the room. "Has not my master often said that I seemed born to be a prince?" It seemed to him that he must be the son of some unknown monarch, and at last he determined to set out at once and travel in search of his proper rank. He felt as if the splendid robe might have been sent to him by some kind of fairy, and he took care not to neglect such a precious gift. He collected all his savings, and, concealed by the darkness of the night, he passed through the gates of Alexandria. The new prince excited a good deal of curiosity wherever he went, for his splendid robe and majestic manner did not seem quite suitable to a person traveling on foot. If anyone asked questions, he only replied with an important air of mystery that he had his own reasons for not writing. However, he soon found out that walking made him ridiculous, so at last he bought a quiet, steady old horse, which he managed to get cheap. One day, as he was ambling among the Merva, that was the horse's name, a horseman overtook him and asked leave to join him, so that they might both beguile the journey with pleasant talk. The newcomer was a bright, cheerful, good-looking young man, who soon plunged into conversation and had many questions. He told Labakan that his own name was Omar, and that he was a nephew of Elfie Bey, and was traveling in order to carry out a given command by his uncle on his deathbed. Labakan was not quite so open in his confidences, but hinted that he too was of noble birth, and was traveling for pleasure. The two men took a fancy to each other, and rode on together. On the second day of their journey, Labakan questioned Omar as to the orders he had to carry out. To his surprise, heard this tale. Elfie Bey, Pacha of Cairo, had brought up Omar from his earliest childhood, and the boy had never known his parents. On his deathbed, Elfie Bey called Omar to him, and then told him he was not his nephew, but the son of a great king, who, having been warned of coming dangers by his astrologers, had sent the young prince away and made a vow not to see him until his 22nd birthday. Elfie Bey did not tell Omar his father's name, but expressly desired him to be at the Great Pillar 4 days east of Alexandria on the 4th day of the coming month, on which day he would be 22 years old. Here he would meet some men, to whom he was to hand a dagger which Elfie Bey gave him, to say, "Here I am for you to seek." Oh, sorry, had to pause. There's kittens on my porch. Adorable fluff babies. Okay. If they answered, "Praised be the prophet who has preserved you," he was to follow them, and they would take him to his father. Labakan was greatly surprised and interested by the story, but after hearing it, he could not help looking on Prince Omar with envious eyes, angry that his friend should have a position he himself longed so much for. He began to make comparisons between the prince and himself, and was obliged to confess that he was a fine-looking young man with very good manners and a pleasant expression. These thoughts haunted him all day, and he dreamt of them all night. He woke very early and saw Omar sleeping quietly, with a happy smile on his face. A wish arose to his mind to take by force or by cunning the things which an unkind fate had denied him. The dagger, which was to act as a passport, was sticking in Omar's girdle. Labakan drew it out gently, and hesitated for a moment whether or not to plunge it into the heart of the sleeping prince. However, he shrank from the idea of murder, so he contented himself with placing the dagger in his own belt, and sat on Omar's swift horse for himself, and was many miles away before the prince woke up to realize his losses. For 2 days Labakan rode on steadily, fearing lest, after all, Omar might reach the meeting place before him. At the end of the second day, he saw the great pillar in the distance. It stood a little hill in the middle of the plain, and could be seen a very long way off. Labakan's heart beat fast at the sight. Though he had had some time in which to think over the part he meant to play, his conscience made him rather uneasy. However, he thought that he must certainly have been born to be as king supported him, and he bravely rode on. The neighborhood was quite bare and desert, and it was a good thing that the new prince had brought food for some time with him, as 2 days were still waiting until the appointed time. Towards the middle of the next day, he saw a long procession of horses and camels coming towards him. It halted at the bottom of the hill, and some splendid tents were pitched. Everything looked like escort of some great man. Labakan made a shrewd guess that all these people had come here on his account, but he checked his impatience, knowing that only on the 4th day could his wishes be fulfilled. The first rays of the rising sun woke the happy tailor, and he began to saddle his horse and prepare to ride to the pillar. It could not help having been remorseful thoughts of the trick he had played on the blighted hopes of the real prince. But the die was cast, and vanity whispered that he was as fine-looking man as the proudest king might wish for his son, and that, moreover, what happened had happened. With these thoughts he summoned up all his courage and sprang on his horse. In less than a quarter of an hour was at the foot of the hill. Here he dismounted and tied the horse to a bush, and drawing out Prince Omar's dagger, climbed up the hill. At the foot of the pillar stood 6 men round a tall and stately person. A superb robe of cloth of gold was girt around him with a white cashmere shawl, and his white, richly jeweled turban showed that he was a man of wealth and high rank. Labakan went straight up to him, and bending low, handed him the dagger, saying, "Here I am who you seek." "Praised be the prophet who preserved you," replied the old man, with tears of joy. "Embrace me, my dear son Omar." The proud tailor was deeply moved by these solemn words, and with mingled shame and joy sank into the old king's arms. But his happiness was not long unclouded. He raised his head to see a horseman who seemed trying to urge a tired and unwilling horse across the plain. Only too soon Labakan recognized his old horse, Merva, and the real Prince Omar, but having once told a lie, he made up his mind not to own his deceit. At last the horseman reached the foot of the hill, where he flung himself from the saddle and hurried up to the pillar. "Stop!" he cried. "Whoever you may be, do not let the disgraceful impostor take you in. My name is Omar, and let no one attempt to rob me of it." The turn of affairs threw the standers by into great surprise. The old king in particular seemed much moved as he looked from the face of one to the other. At last Labakan spoke with forced calmness. "Most gracious lord and father, do not let yourself be deceived by this man. As far as I know, he is a half-crazy tailor's apprentice from Alexandria, named Labakan, who really deserves more pity than anger." These words infuriated the prince. Foaming with rage, he tried to press towards Labakan, but the attendants threw themselves upon him and held him fast, whilst the king said, "Truly, my dear son, the poor fellow is quite mad. Let him be bound and placed in the dromedary. Perhaps we may be able to get some help for him." The prince's first rage was over, and with tears he cried to the king, "My heart tells me that you are my father, and in my mother's name I entreat you to hear me." "Oh, heaven forbid," was the reply. "He is talking nonsense again. How can the poor man have got such notions into his head?" With these words, the king took Labakan's arm to support him down the hill. They both mounted richly caparisoned horses and rode across as plain as the head of their followers. The unlucky prince was tied hand and foot, and hastened upon the dromedary, a guard riding on either side and keeping a sharp lookout on him. The old king was Satch, Sultan of the Wachevets. For many years he had no children, but at length the son he had long wished for was born. But the soothsayers and magicians whom he had consulted as to the child's future said all that it was until he was 22 years old he had stood in danger of being injured by an enemy. So, to make all safe, the Sultan had confided the prince to his trusty friend Elfi Bey, and deprived himself of the happiness of seeing him for 22 years. All this the Sultan told Labakan, and was much pleased by his appearance and dignified manner. When they reached their own country, they were received with every sign of joy, for the news of the prince's safe return had spread like wildfire, and every town and village was decorated, whilst the inhabitants thronged to meet in cries of joy and gratefulness. All this filled Labakan's heart with rapture, whilst unfortunate Omar followed in silent rage and despair. At length they arrived in the capital, where the public rejoicings were grander and more brilliant than anywhere else. The queen awaited them in the great hall of the palace, surrounded by her entire court. It was getting dark, and hundreds of colored hanging lamps were lit to turn night into day. The brightest hung around the throne on which the queen sat, and which stood above 4 steps in pure gold inlaid with great amethysts. The 4 greatest nobles in the kingdom held a canopy of crimson silk over the queen, and the Sheik of Medina fanned her with a peacock feather fan. In this state she waited for her husband and her son, She, too, had not seen Omar since his birth, but so many dreams had shown her what he would look like, and that she felt she would know him among 1,000. And now the sound of trumpets and drums and shouts and cheers outside announced a long-looked-for moment. The doors flew open, and rows of low-bending couriers and servants, the king approached the throne, leading his pretended son by the hand. "Here," he says, "is he whom you've long been looking for so long." The queen interrupted him. "That is not my son," she cried. "That is not the face the prophet has shown me in my dreams." Just as the king was about to reason with her, the door was thrown violently open, and Prince Omar rushed in, followed by his keepers, whom he had managed to get away from. He flung himself down before the throne, panting, "Here I will die. Kill me at once, cruel father. I cannot bear this shame any longer." Everyone pressed round the unhappy man, and the guards were about to seize him, when the queen, who was first dumb with surprise, sprang up from her throne. "Hold!" she said. "This and no other is the right one. This is the one whom my eyes have never seen, but whom my heart recognizes." The guards stepped back, but the king called to them in a furious voice to secure the madman. "It is I who must judge," he said in tones of command. "And this matter cannot be decided by a woman's dreams, but by certainly unmistakable signs. This one," pointing to Labica, "is my son, and for it is he who brought me the token of my friend Elfie, the dagger." "He stole it from me!" shrieked Omar. "He betrayed my suspicious confidence!" But the king would not listen to his son's voice, for he had always been accustomed to depend upon his own judgment. He let the unhappy Omar be dragged from the hall, while he himself retired with Labigan to his own rooms, full of anger with the queen, his wife, in spite of their many happy years together. The queen, on her side, was plunged into grief, for she felt certain that the impostor had won her husband's heart and taken the place of her real son. When the first shock was over, she began to think how she could convince the king of his mistake. Of course, it would be a difficult matter, as the man was declared who was Omar had produced a dagger as a token, besides taking all sorts of things that happened when he was a child. She called her oldest and wisest ladies about her and asked their advice, but none of them had any to give. At last, one very clever old woman said, "Did not the young man who brought the dagger call him whom your majesty believes to be your son Labican, and say he was a crazy tailor?" "Yes," replied the queen, "but what of that?" "Might it not be," said the old lady, "that the impostor has called your real son by his name? If this should be the case, I know a capital way to find out the truth." And she whispered some words to the queen, who seemed much pleased, and went off at once to see the king. Now the queen was a very wise woman, and she pretended to think she might have made a mistake, and only begged to be allowed to put a test to the young man to prove which was the real prince. The king, who was feeling much ashamed of the rage he had been in with his dear wife, consented at once, and he said, "No doubt others would make them ride and shoot or something of that sort, but everyone learns these things. Or should set them a task which requires sharp wits and clever hands. I want them to try which of them can best make a kaftan and a pair of trousers." The king laughed. "No, no, that will never do. You suppose my son could compete with that crazy tailor as to which he could make the best clothes? No, dear, that won't work at all." When the queen claimed his promise, and he was a man of his word, the king gave in at last. He sent for his son and begged that he would humor his mother, who had set her heart on making a kaftan. The worthy Labican laughed to himself. "Well, if that is all she wants," he thought, "His Majesty will be soon pleased to own me." 2 rooms were prepared, with pieces of material, scissors, needles, and threads, and each young man was shut up in one of them. The king felt rather curious as to what sort of garments his son would make, and the queen, too, was very anxious as to the result of her experiment. On the 3rd day they sent for the 2 young men and their work. Labakan came first and spread out his kaftan before the eyes of the astonished king. "See, father," he said. "See, my honored mother. If this is not a masterpiece of work, I bet the court tailor himself cannot do better." The queen smiled and turned to Omar. "And what have you done, my son?" He impatiently threw the stuff and the scissors down on the floor. "I have not been taught to manage a horse, draw a sword, and throw a lance in 60 paces, but never learned to sew, and such a thing would have been thought beneath the notice of a pupil of Elfie Bey, the ruler of Cairo." "Ah, true son of your father," cried the queen. "If only I might embrace you and call me son. Forgive me, my lord and husband," she added, turning to the king, "for trying to find out the truth in this way. Do you see not yourself which is a prince and which is a tailor? Certainly this kaftan is a very fine one, but I should like to know what the master is this young man who taught this man to make clothes." The king sat deep in thought, looking now at his wife and then at Labakan, who was doing his best to hide his vexation at his own stupidity. At last the king said, "Even this trial does not satisfy me, but happily I know of a sure way to discover whether or not I've been deceived." He ordered his swiftest horse to be saddled, mounted, and rode off alone into the forest at some distance. Here lived a kindly fairy called Adelaide, who had often helped kings of his race and her good advice, and he betook her thither himself. In the middle of the forest was a wide open space surrounded by great cedar trees, and this was supposed to be the fairy's favorite spot. When the king reached this place, he dismounted and tied his horse to the tree, and standing in the middle of the open place, he said, "If it is true that you have helped my ancestors in their time of need, do not despise their descendants, but give me counsel, for that of men has failed me." He had hardly finished speaking when one of the cedar trees opened, and a veiled figure, all dressed in white, stepped from it. "I know your errand, King Sashad," she said. "It is an honest one, and I will give you my help. Take these 2 little boxes and let the 2 men who claim to be your son choose between them. I know that the real prince will make no mistake." Then she handed him 2 little boxes made of ivory set with gold and pearls. On the lid of each, which the king vainly tried to open, was inscribed with diamonds. On one stood the words "Honor and Glory," and on the other, "Wealth and Happiness." It would be a hard choice, thought the king as he rode home. He lost no time in sending for the queen and all his court, and when he finished the symbol he made a sign, and Labakan was led in. With a proud air he walked up to the throne and kneeled down, saying, "What does my lord and father command?" The king replied, "My son, doubts have been thrown at your claim to your name. One of these boxes contains the proof of your birth. Choose for yourself. No doubt you will choose right." Then he pointed to the ivory boxes, which were placed in 2 little tables near the throne. Labakan rose and looked at the boxes. He thought for some minutes and then said, "My honored father, what can be better than the happiness of being your son, and nobler than the riches of your love? I choose the box with the words wealth and happiness." "We shall see presently if you have chosen the right one. For the present, take a seat there next to Pacha of Medina," replied the king. Omar was led in, looking sad and sorrowful. He threw himself down before the throne and asked what the king's pleasure. The king pointed out the 2 boxes to him, and he rose and went to the tables. He carefully read the 2 mottos and said, "The last few days have shown me how uncertain happiness and how easily riches vanish away. Should I lose the crown, by it I make my choice of honor and glory." He laid his hands on the box as he spoke, but the king signed to him to wait, and he ordered Labakan to come to the other table and lay his hands on the box he had chosen. And the king rose from his throne, and in solemn silence all present rose too, and also said, "Open the boxes, and may Allah show us the truth." The boxes were opened with the greatest ease. The one Omar had chosen lay a little gold crown and a scepter on a velvet cushion. In Labakan's box was found a large needle and some thread. The king told the 2 young men to bring him their boxes. They did so, and he took the crown in his hand and held it. It grew bigger and bigger, till it was as large as a real crown. He placed it on the head of his son Omar and kissed his forehead, and placed him on his right hand. Then, turning to Labakan, he said, "There's an old proverb. A cobbler sticks to his last. It seems as though you were to stick to your needle. You have not deserved any mercy, and I cannot be harsh on this day. I give you your life, but I advise you to leave this country as fast as you can." Full of shame, the unlucky Tailor could not answer. He flung himself down before Omar, and with tears in his eyes, he asked, "Can you forgive me, Prince?" "Go in peace," said Omar as he raised him. "Oh, my true son!" cried the king as he clasped the prince on his arms, whilst all of Patches and Emir shouted, "Long live Prince Omar!" In the midst of all the noise and rejoicing, Labakan slipped off with the little box under his arm. He went to the stables and saddled his old horse Merva and rode out to the gates of Alexandria. Nothing but the ivory box with its diamond motto was left to show him that the last few weeks had not been a dream. When he reached Alexandria, he rode up to his old master's door. When he entered the shop, his master came forward to ask what was his pleasure. He soon saw it was he who had called his workmen, and they all fell on Labakan with blows and angry words, till at last he fell, half fainting, on a heap of old clothes. The master then scolded him soundly about the stolen robe, but in vain. Labakan had told him he had come to pay for it, and offered 3 times its price. Then they began beating him again, and at last pushed him out of the house, more dead than alive. He could do nothing but remount his horse and ride to an inn. Here he found a quiet place in which to rest his bruised and battered limbs, and to think of his many misfortunes. He fell asleep fully determined to not give up on being great, and to lead the life of an honest workman. The next morning he set to work to fulfill his good resolutions. He told the little box of jewelry for a good price, and bought a house and opened a workshop. Then he hung up a sign, "Labakan, Tailor," over his door, and sat down to mend his own torn clothes with the very needle which had been in the ivory box. After a while he was called away, but when he went back to his work he found a wonderful thing had happened. The needle was sewing away all by itself, and making the neatest little stitches, such as Labakan had never been able to make, even at his best. Certainly, even the smallest gift of a fairy is of great value, and this one had yet another advantage, for the thread never came to an end, however much the needle sewed. Labakan soon got plenty of customers, and used to cut out the clothes and make the first stitch with the magic needle, then leave it to do the rest. Before long the whole town went to him, for his work was both so good and so cheap. The only puzzle was how he could do so much, working all alone, and why he also worked with closed doors. And so the promise of the ivory box of wealth and happiness came true for him. And when he heard of all the brave doings of Prince Omar, who was the pride and darling of his people and the terror of his enemies, the ex-prince thought to himself, "After all, I'm better off as a tailor, for honor and glory are apt to be very dangerous things." The kittens are playing on the porch. Just see the gray one and the black and white one. Don't see the white one anymore. They're cute kittens. Depending on which Discords posted the pictures on, you might have seen them. Okay, there's at least 3 kittens. Don't see the white one. I guess it was a good thing I set up the camera to look at my porch. Where I thought someone was going to sneak up to me and it ended up being kittens. And speaking of kittens, and the fact I seem to have a colony of them, our next story tonight, The Colony of Cats. Long, long ago, as far back as the time when animals spoke, There lived a community of cats in a deserted house they had taken possession of, not far from a large town. They had everything they could possibly desire for their comfort. They were well fed and well lodged, and if by any chance an unlucky mouse was stupid enough to venture in their way, they caught it, not to eat it, but for the pure pleasure of catching it. The old people of the town related how they had heard their parents speak of a time when the whole country was so overrun with rats and mice that there was not so much as a grain of corn, nor an ear of maize to be gathered in the fields, and it might be out of gratitude to the cats who had rid the country of these plagues that their descendants were allowed to live there in peace. No one knows where they got the money to pay for everything, nor who paid it, for all this happened so very long ago. But one thing is certain, they were rich enough to keep a servant, for though they lived very happily together and did not scratch nor fight more than human beings would have done, they were not clever enough to do their housework themselves, and preferred all of the events to someone to cook their meat, which they would have scorned to eat raw. Not only were they very difficult to please about the housework, but most women quickly tired of living alone with only cats for companions. Consequently, they never kept a servant long, and it had become a saying in the town, when anyone found herself reduced to her last penny, "I will go and live with the cats." And so many a poor woman actually did. Now Lizeno was not happy at home, for her mother, who was a widow, was much fonder of her elder daughter, so that often the younger one fared very badly and had not enough to eat, while the elder could have everything she desired. When Lizena dared to complain, she was certain to have a good beating. At last the day came when she was at the end of her courage and patience, and exclaimed to her mother and sister, "As you all hate me so much, you'll be glad to be rid of me. I'm going to go and live with the cats." "Be off with you!" cried her mother, seizing an old broom handle from behind the door. Poor Lindsay did not wait to be told twice, but ran off at once, and never stopped until she reached the door to the cat's house. Their cook had left them that very morning, with her face all scratched, as a result of such a quarrel with the head of the house that had very nearly scratched out her eyes. Zana, therefore, was warmly welcomed, and she set at work to prepare the dinner, not without many misgivings as to the taste of cats, and whether she would be able to satisfy them. Going to and fro about her work, she found herself frequently hindered by the constant succession of cats who appeared one after another in the kitchen to inspect the new servant. She had one in front of her feet, one perched on her back of a chair while she peeled the vegetables. A third sat on the table beside her, and 5 or 6 others prowled about among the pots and pans on the shelves against the wall. The air resounded with their purring, which meant they were pleased with the new maid, but Rosanna had not yet learned to understand their language, and often she did not know what they wanted her to do. However, she was a good, kind-hearted girl, and she set to work to pick up the little kittens which tumbled about on the floor, and patched up quarrels, and nursed in a big lap which had Big Tabby, the oldest of the community, which had a lame paw. All of these kindnesses could hardly fail to make a favorable impression on those cats, and it was even better after a while when she had time to grow accustomed to their strange ways. Never had the house been kept so clean, their meat so well served, nor the sick cats so well cared for. After a time they had visited an old barn cat whom they called their father, who lived by himself in a barn at the top of a hill, and came down time after time to inspect the little colony. He, too, was much taken with Lysania, and inquired on first seeing her, "Are you well served in this place, my little black-eyed person?" And the cats answered with one voice, "Oh, yes, Father Gato. We have never had so good a servant." At each of his visits the answer was always the same, but after a time the old cat, who was very observant, noticed that the little maid had grown to look sadder and sadder. "What is the matter? My child has been kind to you?" he asked one day, when he found her crying in the kitchen. She burst into tears and answered between her sobs, "Oh, no, they are all very good to me, but I long for news from home, and I pine to see my mother and sister." Old Gato, being a sensible old cat, understood the little servant's feelings. "You shall go home," he said, "and you shall not come back until you please. But first you must be rewarded for all your kind services to my children. Follow me down into the inner cellar, where you have yet never seen, for I always keep it locked and carry the key away with me." Lavinia looked around her in amazement as they went down to the great vaulted cellar beneath the kitchen. Before her stood big earthenware water jars, one of which contained oil, and the other containing a liquid shining like gold. "In which of these jars shall I dip you?" asked Father Gato, with a grin that showed all of his sharp white teeth, while his mustaches stood straight on either side of his face. The little maid looked at the two jars from under her blonde dark lashes. "In the oil jar," she answered timidly, thinking to herself. "I could not ask to be bathed in gold." But Father Gato replied, "No, no, you deserve something better than that." And seizing her in his strong paws, he plunged her into liquid gold. Wonder and wonders, when Lavinia came out from the jar, she shone from head to foot like the sun in the heavens on a fiery summer day. Her pretty pink cheeks, her long black hair had kept their natural color. Otherwise, she would have become a statue of pure gold. Father Gato purred loudly with satisfaction. "Go home," he said, "and see your mother and sisters. But take care you do not hear, if you hear the cock crow, turn towards it. If, on the contrary, the ass brays, you must look the other way." The little maid, having gratefully kissed the white paw of the old cat, set off for home, and just as she got near her mother's house, the cock crowed. She quickly turned towards it. Immediately her beautiful golden hair appeared around her forehead, crowning her glossy black hair. At the same time, the ass began to bray, but Lavinia took care not to look over the fence into the field where the donkey was feeding. Her mother and sister, who were in front of the house, uttered cries of admiration and astonishment when they saw her, and their cries became still louder when Lavinia, taking her handkerchief from her pocket, drew out also a handful of gold. For some days the mother and her two daughters lived very happily together, and Lavinia had given them everything she had brought away, except her golden clothing, for that would not come off, in spite of all the efforts of her sister, who was madly jealous of her good fortune. The golden star, too, could not be removed from her forehead, but all the gold pieces she drew from her pockets had found their way to her mother and sister. "Oh, now go and see if I can get out the pussies," said Peppina, the elder sister, one morning, and she took Liz's baskets and fastened her pockets into her own skirt. "I should like to have some of the cat's gold for myself," she thought, and she left her mother's house before the sun rose. The cat colony had not yet taken another servant, for they knew they could not get anyone to replace Lavinia, whose loss they had not yet ceased to mourn. When they heard that Peppina was her sister, they all ran to meet her. "She is not the least like her," the kittens whispered amongst themselves. "Hush, be quiet," the older cat said. "All servants cannot be pretty." They decided she was not at all like Lavinia. Even the most reasonable and large-minded of the cats soon acknowledged that. The very first day she shut the kitchen door in the face of a tomcat who used to enjoy watching Lavinia at her work, and a young and mischievous cat who jumped in by the kitchen window and alighted on the table got such a blow with a rolling pin that he squalled for an hour. With every day that passed, the household became more and more aware of its misfortune. The work was done badly as the servant was surly and disagreeable. In the corners of the rooms there were collected heaps of dust, spiders' webs hung from the ceilings, and in front of the window panes the beds were hardly ever made, and the feather beds, so beloved by the old and feeble cats, had never once been shaken since Lavinia left the house. At Father Gato's next visit he found the whole colony in a state of uproar. "Caesar has one paw so badly swollen that it looks as if it were broken," said one. "Peppina kicked him with her great wooden shoes on. Hector has an abscess in his back where the wooden chair was flung at him, and Agrippina's 3 little kittens have died of hunger beside their mother because Peppina forgot to get them in their basket up in the attic. There's no putting up with this creature. Send her away, Father Gatto. Xenia herself would not be angry with us. She must know very well what her sister is like. Come here, said Father Gatto in his most severe tones to Peppina, and he took her down to the cellar and showed her the same 2 great jars that he showed Xenia. "In which of these shall I dip you?" he asked, and she made haste answered, "In the liquid gold," for she was no more modest than she was good or kind. Father Gatto's yellow eyes started fire. "You have not deserved it," he uttered, in a voice like thunder, and seizing her, he flung her into the jar of oil, where she nearly suffocated. When she came to the surface screaming and struggling, the vengeful cat seized her again and rolled her in the ash heap on the floor. When she rose, dirty and blinded and disgusting to behold, he thrust her out from the door, saying, "Begone! When you have met a braying ass, be careful to turn your head towards it." Stumbling and raging, Peppina set off for home, thinking herself fortunate to find a stick by the wayside in which to support herself. She was within sight of her mother's house when she heard in the meadow on the right the voice of a donkey braying loudly. Quickly she turned her head towards it, and at the same time her hand put up to her forehead, where, wavering like a plume, was a donkey's tail. She ran home to her mother at the top of her speed, yelling with rage and despair, and it took Xenia 2 hours with a big basin of hot water and 2 cakes of soap to rid her of the layers of ash with which Father Gatto had adorned her. As for the donkey's tail, it was impossible to get rid of that, as it was firmly fixed to her forehead, as was a golden star to Lasinia's. Their mother was furious. She first beat Xenia unmercifully with a broom, then she took her to the mouth of the well and lowered her in, leaving her at the bottom, weeping and crying for help. Before this happened, however, the king's son, in passing the mother's house, had seen Xenia sewing in the parlor, and had been dazzled by her beauty. After coming back 2 or 3 times, he at last ventured to approach the window and whisper in the softest voice, "Lovely maiden, will you be my bride?" And she had answered, "I will." Next morning, when the prince arrived to claim his bride, he found her wrapped in a large white veil. "Is it so that maidens receive their parents' hands?" said the mother, hoping to make the king's son marry Peppina in place of her sister, and had fastened the donkey's tail around her head, like a lock of her hair under the veil. The prince was young and a little timid, so he made no objections, and seated Peppina in the carriage beside him. Their way led past the old house inhabited by the cats, who were all in the window, for the report had got out that the prince was going to marry the most beautiful maiden in the world, on whose forehead shone a golden star. And they knew that this could only be their adored Xenia. As the carriage slowly passed in front of the old house, where the cats from all parts of the world seemed to be gathered, a song burst out from every throat. "Mew, mew, mew, Prince, look quick behind you, and the well is fair Xenia, and you've got nothing but Peppina." When he heard this, the coachman, who understood the cat's language better than the prince, his master, stopped the horse and asked, "Does your highness know what the grimalkins are saying?" And the song broke forth again, louder than ever. With a turn of his hand, the prince threw back the veil and discovered the puffed-up, swollen face of Peppina, with the donkey's tail twisted around her head. "Ah, traitress!" he exclaimed, and ordering the horses to be turned around, he drove the elder daughter, quivering with rage, to the old woman who had sought to deceive him. With his hand on the hilt of his sword, he demanded Xenia in so terrific a voice that the mother hastened to the well to draw her prisoner out. Xenia's clothing and her gold star shone brilliantly when the prince led her home to the king, his father, and the whole palace was lit up. The next day they were married, and lived happily ever after. And the cats, headed by old Father Gatto, were present at the wedding. leaves how many stories? Three stories are left. Chat? Those present? Should I finish the book? There may be 3 stories, but that is only 13 pages. What say you, chat? Do I finish it? My voice is fine. I'm still drinking, so. Like I said, there's only 13 pages left. Well, that's a finish it from Matsu. Anyone else? And the kittens have left my porch. Oh, this next story is definitely a good one. I know I've read it before. It's also the title of one of my chapters in my book. How to find out a true friend. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who longed to have a son. As none came, one day they made a vow to the shrine of St. James that if their prayers were granted, the boy should set out on the pilgrimage as soon as he had passed his 18th birthday. And fancy their delight when one evening the king returned home from hunting and saw a baby lying in the cradle. All the people came crowding around to peep at it, and declared it was the most beautiful baby that was ever seen. Of course, that is what they always say, but this time it happened to be true. And every day the boy grew bigger and stronger until he was 12 years old, when the king died, and he was left alone to take care of his mother. In this way 6 years passed by, and his 18th birthday drew near. When she thought of this, the queen's heart sank within her. For he was the light of her eyes, and how was she to send him forth on unknown dangers that beset a pilgrim? So one day she grew more and more sorrowful, and when she was alone, wept bitterly. Now the queen imagined that no one but herself knew how sad she was, but one morning her son said to her, "Mother, why do you cry the whole day long?" "Nothing, my son. There's only one thing in the world that troubles me." "What is that one thing?" he asked. "Are you afraid of your properties badly damaged? Let me go and look into the matter." This pleased the queen, and he rode off to the plain country where his mother owned great estates. But everything was in beautiful order, and he returned with a joyful heart and said, "Now, mother, you can be happy again, for your lands are better managed than anyone else's I've seen. The cattle are thriving, the fields are thick with corn, and they will soon be ripe for harvest." "Well, that is good news indeed," answered she, But it did not seem to make any difference to her, and the next morning she was weeping and wailing as loudly as ever. "Dear mother," said her son in despair, "if you will not tell me what is the cause of all this misery, I shall leave home and wander far through the world." "Oh, my son," cried the queen, "it is the thought that I must part with you which causes me such grief. For before you were born we vowed a vow to St. James that when your 18th birthday is passed, you should make a pilgrimage to his shrine. And very soon you will be 18, and I shall lose you. And for a whole year my eyes will never be gladdened by the sight of you, for the shrine is far away." "Will it take no longer than that to reach it?" he said. "Oh, don't be so wretched. It is only dead people who never return. As long as I am alive, you may be sure I will come back to you." After this manner he comforted his mother, and on his 18th birthday his best horse was led to the door of the palace, and he took leave of the queen in these words: "Dear mother, farewell, and by the help of fate I shall return to you as soon as I can." The queen burst into tears and wept sore. Then amidst her sobs she threw 3 apples from her pocket and held them out, saying, "My son, take these apples and give heed to my words. You will need a companion in the long journey on which you are going. If you come across a young man who pleases you, beg him to accompany you, and when you get an invite to dinner with you, after you have eaten one of these apples cut in 2 unequal portions, ask him to take one. If he takes the larger bit, then part with him. If he takes a smaller, treat him as your brother and share with him all you have." Then she kissed her son once more and blessed him and let him go. Hi, Cora. The young man rode a long way without meeting a single creature, but at last he saw a youth in the distance, about the same age as himself, and he spurred his horse till he came up with a stranger, who stopped and asked, "Where are you going, fun fellow?" "I'm making a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. James, for before I was born my mother vowed that I should go forth and thank offering on my 18th birthday." "That's in my case too," said the stranger, "and we must both travel in the same direction. Let us bear each other company." The young man agreed to this proposal, and he took care not to get on terms of familiarity with the newcomer until he had tried him with the apple. By and by they reached an inn. At the sight of this, the king's son said, "I'm very hungry. Let us enter and order something to eat." The other consented, and they were soon sitting before a good dinner. When they had finished, the king's son drew an apple from his pocket and cut it into a big half and little half, and offered both to the stranger, who took the biggest bit. "You're no friend of mine," thought the king's son, and in order to part company with him, he pretended to be ill and declared himself unable to proceed on his journey. "Well, I can't wait for you," thought the other. "I'm in haste to push on, so farewell." "Farewell," said the king's son, glad in his heart to be rid of him so easily. The king's son remained in the inn for some time, as to let the young man have a good start. Then he ordered his horse and rode after him, but he was very sociable, and the way seemed long and dull by himself. "Oh, if I could only meet a true friend," he thought, "so that I would have someone to speak to. I hate being alone." Soon after he came up with a young man, who stopped and asked him, "Where are you going, my fine fellow?" The king's son explained the object of his journey, and the young man answered, as the other had done, that he was also fulfilling a vow his mother made at his birth. "Well, we can ride on together," said the king's son, and the road seemed much shorter now that he had someone to talk to. At length they reached an inn, and the king's son exclaimed, "I'm very hungry. Let us go in and eat something." When they had finished, the king's son drew out an apple of his pocket and cut it in 2, and held the big bit and the little bit out to his companion, who took the big bit at once and soon ate it up. "You are no friend of mine," thought the king's son, and began to declare he felt so ill that he could not continue his journey. When he had given the young man a good start, he set off himself, but the way seemed longer and duller than even before. "Oh, if I could only meet someone with a true friend who should be a brother to me," he sighed sadly. As the thought crossed his mind, he noticed a youth going along the same road as himself. The youth came up to him and said, "Which way are you going, my fine fellow?" And for the third time the king's son explained his mother's vow. "Why, that's just like me!" cried the youth. "Then let us ride on together," answered the king's son. Now the miles seemed to slip by, for the newcomer was so lively and entertaining that the king's son could not help hoping that he indeed might prove to be a true friend. More quickly than he could have thought possible, they reached an inn by the roadside, and turning to his companion, the king's son said, "I'm hungry. Let us go in and have something to eat." So they went in and ordered dinner, and when they had finished, the king's son drew out of his pocket the last apple, and cut it into 2 unequal portions, and held both out to the stranger. And the stranger took a little apiece, and the heart of the king's son was glad to be within him, for at last he had found a friend he had been looking for. "Good youth," he cried, "we will be brothers, and what is mine shall be thine, and what is thine shall be mine, and together we shall push on to the shrine, and if one of us dies on the road, the other shall carry his body there." And the stranger agreed to all he said, and they rode forward together. It took them a whole year to reach the shrine, but they passed through many different lands on the way. One day they arrived half-starved in a big city, and said to one another, "Let us stay here for a little and rest before we set forth again." So they hired a small house close to the royal castle, and took up their abode there. The following morning the king of the country happened to step on from his balcony, and saw the young men in the garden, and said to himself, "Dear me, those are wonderfully handsome youths, but one is handsomer than the other, and to him I will give my daughter to wife." And indeed, the king's son excelled his friend in beauty. In order to set about this plan, the king asked both the young men to dinner, and when they arrived at the castle, he received them with the utmost kindness, and sent for his daughter, who was more lovely than both the sun and moon put together. But at bedtime, the king caused the other men to have been given a poisoned drink, which killed him in a few minutes, for he thought to himself, "If his friend dies, the other will forget his pilgrimage and will stay here and marry my daughter." When the king's son awoke the next morning, he inquired of the servant where his friend had gone, as he did not see him. "He died suddenly last night," he said, "and is to be buried immediately." But the king's son sprang up and cried, "If my friend is dead, I can stay here no longer. I cannot linger an hour in this house." "Oh, give up your journey and remain here," replied the king, "and you shall have my daughter for your wife." "No," answered the king's son, "I cannot stay, but I pray you grant my request, and give me a good horse. Let me go in peace, and when I have fulfilled my vow, then I will return and marry your daughter." So the king, seeing no words to move him, ordered the horse to be brought round, and the king's son mounted it, and took his dead friend before him in the saddle, and they rode away. Now, the young man was not really dead, but only in a deep sleep. When the king's son reached the shrine of St. James, he got down from his horse and took his friend in his arms as if he had been a child, and laid him before the altar. "St. James," he said, "I have fulfilled my vow my parents have made me. I have come myself to your shrine, and have brought my friend. I place him in your hands. Restore him to life, I pray, for though he might be dead, he has fulfilled his vow also." And behold, while he yet prayed, his friend got up and stood before him as well as ever. Both of the young men gave thanks, and set their faces towards him. When they arrived at the town where the king dwelt, they entered the small house over the castle. The news of their coming spread very soon, and the king rejoiced that the handsome young prince had come back again, and commanded great feasts to be prepared, for in a few days his daughter should marry the king's son. The young man could imagine no greater happiness, and when the marriage was over, they spent some months at the court merrymaking. At length the king's son said, "My mother awaits me at home, full of care and anxiety. Here I must remain no longer, and tomorrow I will take my wife and my friend and start for home." And the king was content that he should do so, and gave orders to prepare for their journey. Now in his heart, the king cherished a deadly hate towards a poor young man whom he had tried to kill, but who had returned to him living, and in order to hurt him send a message from some distant spot. "See that you are quick," he said, "for your friend will await your return before he starts." The youth put spurs to his horse and departed, bidding the prince farewell, so that the king's message might be delivered all the sooner. As soon as he had started, the king went to the chamber of the prince and said to him, "If you do not start immediately, you will never reach the place where you must camp for tonight." "I cannot start without my friend," replied the king's son. "Oh, he will be back in an hour," replied the king, "and I will give him my best horse, so that he will be sure to catch up." The king's son allowed himself to be persuaded, and took leave of his father-in-law, and set out with his wife to journey home. Meanwhile, the poor friend had been unable to get through the task in the short time appointed by the king, and when he returned, the king said to him, "Your comrade is a long way off by now. You had better see if you can overtake him." The young man bowed and left the king's presence, followed after his friend on foot, for he had no horse. Night and day he ran until at length he reached the place where the king's son had pitched his tent, and sank down before him, a miserable object, worn out and covered with dust and mud. But the king's son welcomed him with joy, and tended him as well as he would his brother. At last they came home again, and the queen was waiting and watching in the palace, and she had never ceased to do so since her son had rode away. She almost died of joy at seeing him again, but after a little she remembered his sick friend, and ordered a bed to be made ready from the best doctors in the country to be sent for. When they heard the queen's summons, they flocked from all parts, but none could cure him. After everyone had tried and failed, the servant entered and informed the queen that the strange old man had just knocked at the palace gate and declared that he was able to heal the dying youth. Now, he was a holy man who had heard of the trouble the king's son was in, and had come to help. It happened that at this very little time the little daughter was born to the king's son, but in the distress for his friend he had hardly thought to spare for the baby. He could not be prevailed to leave the sick bed. As he was bending over, the holy man entered the room. "Do you wish your friend to be cured?" he asked the newcomer, the king's son. "What price would you pay?" "What price?" answered the king's son. "Only tell me, and I will do what I can to heal him." "Listen to me, then," said the old man. "This evening you must take your child and open her veins and smear the wounds of your friend with her blood, and you will see he will get well in an instant." At these words the king's son shrieked with horror, for he loved the baby dearly, but he answered, "I have sworn that I would treat my friend as if he were my brother, and there's no other way. My child must be sacrificed." And by this evening he had already fallen, and he took the child and opened its veins, and smeared the blood all over the wounds of the sick man, and the look of death departed from him, and he grew strong and rosy once more. But the little child lay as white and as still as if she had been dead. They laid her in the cradle and wept bitterly, for they thought that the next morning she would be lost to them. At sunrise the old man returned and asked after the sick man. "He is as well as ever," answered the king's son. "And where is your baby?" "In the cradle yonder. I think she is dead," replied the father sadly. "Look at her once more," said the holy man, and they drew near the cradle, and there lay the baby, smiling at them. "I am St. James of Lycia," said the old man, "and I have come to help you, for I have seen that you are a true friend. From henceforth live happily, all of you together, and if trouble should draw near you, send for me, and I will aid you to get through them." With these words he lifted his hand in blessing and vanished. And they obeyed him, and were happy and content, and tried to make the people of the land happy and contented as well. I have no more pauses for the ads. So, when we come back, I'll read the last two stories. See you in a bit. Okay, welcome back. Huh, I did not know there was a statue of John Lennon in Havana. Okay, we have two stories left. Apparently this one is Portuguese. Clever Maria. There was once a merchant who lived close to the royal palace and had 3 daughters. They were all pretty, but Maria, the youngest, was the prettiest of the 3. One day the king sent for the merchant, who was a widower, to give him directions about a journey he wished the good man to take. The merchant would rather not have gone, as he did not like leaving his daughters at home, but he could not refuse to obey the king's commands. With a heavy heart he returned home to say farewell to them. Before he left, he took 3 pots of basil and gave one to each girl, saying, "I'm going on the journey, but I leave these pots, one to each. I leave these pots. You must let nobody into the house. When I come back, they'll tell me what happened." "Nothing will have happened," said the girls. The father went away, and the following day the king, accompanied by 2 friends, paid a visit to the 3 girls who were sitting at supper. When they saw who was there, Maria said, "Let us go and get a bottle of wine from the cellar. I will carry the key, the eldest sister can take the light, and the other will bring the bottle." The king replied, "Oh, do not trouble, we are not thirsty." "Very well, we will not go," answered the 2 older girls. But Maria merely said, "I shall go anyhow." She left the room and went to the hall, where she put out the light, and putting down the key and the bottle, ran into the house of the neighbor and knocked at the door. "Who is there so late?" asked the old woman, thrusting her head out of the window. "Oh, let me in," answered Maria. "I've quarreled with my eldest sister, and I do not want to fight any more. I've come to beg you to allow me to sleep at night." So the old woman opened the door, and Maria slept in her house. The king was very angry at her for playing truant, but when she returned home next day, she found the plants of her sisters withered away because they had disobeyed their father. Now the window in the room of the eldest overlooked the gardens of the king, and when she saw how fine and ripe the medlars were on the trees, she longed to eat some, and begged Maria to scramble down by a rope and pick her a few, and she would draw her up again. Maria, who was good-natured, swung herself into the garden by the rope and got the medlars, and just as she was making the rope fast under her arms, as to be hauled up, when her sister cried out, "Oh, there are such delicious lemons a little further on. You might bring me 1 or 2." Maria turned around to pluck them, and found herself face to face with the gardener, who caught hold of her, exclaiming, "What are you doing here, you little thief?" "Don't call me names," she said, "or you will get the worst of it," giving him, as she spoke, such a violent push that he fell panting into the lemon bushes. Then she seized the cord and clambered up the window. The next day the second sister had a fancy for bananas, and begged so hard, though Maria had declared she would never do such a thing again. At last she consented, and went down the rope into the king's garden. This time she met the king, who said to her, "Ah, here you are again, cunning one. Now you shall pay for your misdeeds." As he began to cross-question her about what she had done, Maria denied nothing, and when she finished, the king said again, "Follow me to the house, and there you shall pay the penalty." As he spoke, he started for the house, looking back from time to time to make sure that Maria had not run away. All of a sudden, when he glanced around, he found she had vanished completely, without leaving a trace of where she had gone. The search was made all through the town, and there was not a hole or corner which was not ransacked, but there was no sign of her anywhere. This so enraged the king that he became quite ill, and for many months of his life was despaired of it. Meanwhile, the 2 elder sisters had married the 2 friends of the king, and were the mothers of little daughters. Now, one day Maria stole secretly into the house where the elder sister lived, and snatching up the children, put them into a beautiful basket she had with her, and covered with flowers, and inside, so that no one would ever guess it held two babies. Then she dressed herself as a boy, and placing a basket on her head, she walked slowly out of the palace, crying as she went. "Who will carry these flowers to the king, who lies sick of love?" And the king, in his bed, heard what she said, and ordered one of his attendants to go and buy the basket. It was brought to his bedside, and he raised the lid, and cries were heard, and peeping in he saw two little children. He was furious at this new trick, which he felt has to have been played on him by Maria, who was still looking at them, wondering how he should pay her out, when he was told the merchant, Maria's father, had finished the business on which he had been sent to and returned home. The king remembered how Maria had refused to receive his visit, and how she had stolen his fruit, and he determined to be revenged on her. So he sent a message by one of his pages that the merchant was to come to see him the next day, and bring with him a coat made of stone, or else he would be punished. Now the poor man had been very sad since he got home the evening before, for though his daughters had promised that nothing should happen while he was away, he had found the two elder ones married without asking his leave. And now there's a fresh misfortune, for how was he to make a coat of stone? He wrung his hands and declared that the king would be the ruin of him, when Maria suddenly entered. "Do not grieve about the coat of stone, dear father, but take this bit of chalk and go to the palace, and say you have come to measure the king." The old man did not see the use of this, but Maria had so often helped him before that he had confidence in her. So he put the chalk in his pocket and went to the palace. "That is no good," said the king, when the merchant told him what he had come to do. "Well, I can't make the coat you want," replied he. "Then if you would save your head, hand over to me your daughter Maria." The merchant did not reply, but went sorrowfully back to his house, where Maria sat waiting for him. "Oh, my dear child, why was I born? The king said that, instead of the coat, I must deliver you up to him." "Do not be unhappy, dear father, but get a doll made exactly like me, with a string attached to the head, which I can pull for yes and no." So the old man went out at once to see about it. The king remained patiently in his palace, feeling sure that this time Maria could not escape him, and said to his pages, "If a gentleman should come here with his daughter and be asked aloud to speak with me, put the young lady in my room and see that she does not leave it." When the door was shut on Maria, who concealed the doll under her cloak, she hid herself under the couch, keeping fast hold of the string which was fastened to its head. "Signor Maria, I hope that you are well," said the king when he entered the room. The doll nodded. "Now we will reckon up accounts," continued he, as he began at the beginning and ended up with a flower basket. At each fresh misdeed, Maria pulled a string, so that the doll's head nodded absently. "Whoso mocks me merits death," declared the king when he had ended. Drawing his sword, cut off the doll's head. It fell towards him, and he felt the touch of a kiss. He exclaimed, "Oh, Maria, Maria, so sweet in death, so hard to me in life. The man who could kill you deserves to die." And he was about to turn the sword on himself, when the true Maria sprung out from under the bed and flung herself into his arms. And the next day they were married and lived happily for many years. That is a horrible story. How long was her father away on mission? He came back to his two older daughters being married with kids? And their basil wilted? Okay. This last story is only 2.5 pages long. Then we'll be done with the Crimson Fairy book. Which means I have to remember which one's next in the order. Oh well. I'm pretty sure I have it. So I've got... I have 12 of the fairy books. So I'm pretty sure I'm good for the next one. That being said, our last story for the Crimson Fairy book. The Magic Kettle. Right in the middle of Japan, high up among the mountains, an old man lived in his little house. He was very proud of it, and never tired of admiring the whiteness of his straw mats and the pretty papered walls, which in warm weather always slid back, so that the smell of the trees and flowers might come in. One day he was standing looking at the mountain opposite, when he heard a kind of rumbling noise in the room behind him. He turned round, and in the corner he beheld a rusty iron kettle. It could not have seen the light of day for many years. How the kettle got there, the old man did not know, but he took it up and looked it over carefully. When he found that it was quite whole, he cleaned the dust off of it and carried it to the kitchen. "What a piece of luck," he said, smiling to himself. "A good kettle costs money, and it is as well as to have a second one at hand in case of need. Mine is getting worn out, and the water is already beginning to come through its bottom." Then he took the other kettle off the fire and filled the new one with water and put it in its place. No sooner was the water in the kettle getting warm than a strange thing happened, and the man, who was standing by, thought he must be dreaming. First, the handle of the kettle gradually changed its shape to become a head, then the spout grew into a tail, while out of the body sprang four paws, and in a few minutes the man found himself watching not a kettle, but a tanuki. The creature jumped off the fire and bounded around the room like a kitten, running up the walls and over the ceiling, till the old man was in agony lest his pretty room should soon be spoiled. He cried to a neighbor for help, and between them they managed to catch the tanuki and shut him up safely in a wooden chest. Then, quite exhausted, they sat down on the mats and consulted each other what they should do with this troublesome beast. At length they decided to sell him, and bade a child who was passing send him to a certain tradesman called Jimmu. When Jimmu arrived, the old man told him that they had something he wished to get rid of, and lifted the lid of a wooden chest, where they had shut up the tanuki. But to his surprise, no tanuki was there, nothing but the kettle he had found in the corner. It was certainly very odd, but the man remembered what had taken place in the fire, and did not want to keep the kettle any more. So after a little bargaining about price, Jimmu went away, carrying the kettle with him. Now Jimmu had not gotten very far before he felt that the kettle was getting heavier and heavier, and by the time he reached home he was so tired that he was thankful to put it down in the corner of his room, and then forgot all about it. In the middle of the night, however, he was awakened to a loud noise in the corner where the kettle stood. He raised himself up in bed to see what it was, but nothing was there except the kettle, which seemed quiet enough. He thought he must have been dreaming and fell asleep again, only to be roused by a second time by the same disturbance. He jumped up and went to the corner, and by the light of the lamp that he always kept burning, he saw that the kettle had become a tanuki, which was running around after its tail. After he grew weary of that, he ran on the balcony, where he turned several somersaults from pure gladness of heart. The tradesman was much troubled what to do with the animal, and it was only towards morning that he managed to get any sleep. But when he opened his eyes again, there was no tanuki, only the old kettle he had left there the night before. As soon as he had tidied his house, Jimmu set off to tell his story to the friend next door. The man listened quietly, and did not appear surprised as Jimmu expected, for he recollected having heard, in his youth, something about a wonder-working kettle. "Go and travel with it, show it off," he said. "You'll become a rich man. But be careful to ask the tanuki's leave, and also perform some magic ceremonies to prevent him from running away at the sight of the people." Jimmu thanked his friend for his counsel, which he followed exactly. The tanuki's consent was obtained, a booth was built, and a notice was hung up outside it, inviting people to come and witness the most wonderful transformation that was ever seen. They came in crowds, and the kettle was passed from hand to hand, and they were allowed to examine it over and over, even to look inside. Then Jimmu took it back, and setting it on a platform, commanded it to become a Tanuki. In an instant, the handle began to change its head and the spout into a tail, while 4 paws appeared at the sides. "Dance," said Jimmu, and the Tanuki did his steps. He moved first on one side and then on the other, till the people could not stand still any longer, and began to dance too. Gracefully he led a fan dance, and guided without pause into a shadow dance, and the umbrella dance, and it seemed as if he might go on dancing forever, and so very unlikely would have, if Jimmu had not declared he had danced enough, and that the booth must now be closed. Day after day the booth was so full it was hardly possible to enter it, and what the neighbor foretold had come to pass, and Jimmu was a rich man. Yet he did not feel happy. He was an honest man, and he thought that he owed some of his wealth to the man from whom he had bought the kettle. So one morning he put 100 pieces of gold into it, and hanging the kettle once more on his arm, he returned to the seller of it. "I have no right to keep it any longer," he added when he had ended his tale, "so I have brought it back to you, and inside you will find 100 gold pieces as a price for its hire." The man thanked Jimmu, and said that few people would have been as honest as he, and the kettle was brought them both luck, and everything went well for them until they died, which they did when they were very old and respected by everyone. Okay. And that is the end of the Crimson Fairy book. Now, let's see who might be on to raid. Let's see. Any readers? None of the ones I follow use writing and reading. What is Falcor reading? Okay, she's not reading, she's assuming we can do ASMR. If anyone in chat has a suggestion, by all means, throw it out there. Ooh, I'm behind the keg. I didn't notice that. Okay. What's it? Okay, I'm in trouble now. So, suggestions, anyone? Or I can just... Yes. Let's see. I guess I could just raid the closest friend I have online. At least I hope she considers me a friend. Those are my standard issue raid announcements. There's the pro one. Eventually I might make new ones. I don't know. Yeah, I guess this is, since I finished the story, I guess this is the last night I'm going to use this model too. Didn't think about that. We're going to raid dusk. So, thank you all for coming in for Friday Night Fairy Tales. And I will see you sometime next week. Or if you stop by, I think Papa Penguin's doing Shards from the Edge tomorrow, so I'll be there, hopefully. Have a good night, everyone. And pleasant dreams.